Good evening, Cohasset, and welcome to another edition of Our Town. I'm Pat Martin, and tonight I'm without my host, Mark DiGiacomo, who's ill. But with us tonight are two of our guests. We have with us tonight Jackie Dormitzer, and we have Jim Hamilton. Welcome.
Thank you.
Jim, you serve as the chairman of the Committee on Cohasset Town History, and Jackie, you have just written a book that we want to talk a little bit about. But let's start about the impetus for this book. I understand it came out of the work or the desire of the Committee on Town History. Tell us about that committee, how it was formed and what its purpose is, Jim.
Well, this goes back to really about the mid-1990s when the town, at a town meeting, voted $5,000 to establish a committee that would produce a book for the 50th anniversary going into 2000 from the last book, which was the narrative history written by Bert Pratt. That was the history of Cohasset from the year 1900 to 1950. The first one being E. Victor Bigelow's Narrative History 1. We've sort of now given them volume names. The narrative history originally was not volume 1 because they figured that was it. There wasn't going to be another volume. So it was, I think it was Noel Ripley who made the motion that that this history should start to be captured, and the town got behind it. And that's a really good point, that it was a town initiative rather than a private person or even our historical society, which had in fact done some marvelous monographs by David Wadsworth and others. But the town wanted another history, and as they had formed a committee for Bert Pratt's book, the committee was formed, chairman being Wigmore Pearson, the late Wigmore Pearson, who lived right down on Atlantic Avenue at the time. And Wigmore, as we all remember him well, would take a project like this with enthusiasm at 120% and charge. And Wigmore was a perfect individual for this project, since he was indeed a history buff, was involved in community activities,
Member of the Mayflower Society, went on to become
right
the
off
governor
he
of
was
the
one
state.
of the guys that came off the boat. So he was involved with the Mayflower descendants,
Right.
headquartered in Plymouth.
Had a great television show for a long time
And
that
he-
set the format for this show to follow.
It was 10 years, Pearson, person to Pearson. So at any rate, he went about gathering a committee, and it was quite interesting. Things were a little bit more relaxed in those days. I mean, in other words, the town didn't say we're going to have to pick the committee. They sort of left it up to Wigmore. So at that time, he had Molly Hockheppel, who he married, be secretary.
And she was serving at the time as the
She was pretty much just leaving the Patriot Ledger at the time
as the
reporter to the Patriot Ledger. So she was very, very aware of town politics. Whig had pretty solid footing with the Cohasset Historical Society as well, when it was at the Lathrop House, so he had a great interest there. So again, he was the right man for the job. Then he goes around and he starts picking people. And I remember when he came to our house, and he said, "Jim, you're the only person I know that does books. How'd you like to be the production manager?" And I said, "Yes, Wig, I'm on." And then he went down the street to see Lou Harvey. He knew Lou pretty much through ties in Plymouth. Lou was involved a little bit with Plymouth Plantation. And he said, "Lou, we need you because you think outside of the box." and if everybody remembers Lou Harvey, who is still there, Lou approaches things a lot differently. Lou was a super marketing guy. He really looked at this as being a great effort for promotion. Jackie hadn't arrived on the scene yet. The committee had to be sort of put together. And then, I'd say just before 1998, we did put out a sort of RFP for people interested. We got some very good people.
Well, so was your committee before the RFP, were you gathering folks who could contribute to the history?
We actually, we were. I believe we met at the Lathrop House on a number of occasions to look for interested people, and I don't want to leave names out. I probably will, but Ernie Grassi was one. Ernie had a big interest in photographs of the town. He was also involved with the Historical Society. And Clark Chatterton. And we figured, Clark is the guy that can go back into, grade school in Cohasset.
Knew everybody.
Since most of us were kind of newbies to the town, relatively speaking. We had Lynn Lehman, who in fact didn't really live in Cohasset. I think she was living in Scituate, a very good photographer.
Right.
So we could have Lynn aboard for, obviously for getting new work done. And we had Lou Eaton. And Lou was another one of these absolutely classic individuals from the town who, was the member of the Historical Society. And I think he'd even been a part-time moderator for our town meetings at one point.
Right.
Then we had Margot Scheel. I remember Margot because Margot has a very good overview of our town.
She sure does.
She's a licensed pilot, and somehow she can drive the plane
and take beautiful
look
pictures.
down and not either lose her camera or fall out. So off we went, and apologies to anybody else that I've missed here. They might come to me as we talk. And off we went to sort of do the assembly. Which way did we want to go? What was the tack? What should be covered? And we couldn't define everything because, in fact, the author of the piece would be doing that. But we could try to provide some background information and maybe some of the things that we wanted to touch upon. So at that point, the RFP went out. And Jackie stepped up, as did other very qualified people. And I think I was the chairman of the selection committee of one. I brought my recommendations to the committee, and we selected Jackie, which was a wonderful selection for a lot of reasons. She is a great researcher. She knows which way the sentences should be put together as well, and she also had good ties with the library. So we really had a good representation of our town, and David Wadsworth looked in on us and was sort of ex officio. He wasn't really an active member of our committee, but he was always ready and willing to work with Jackie to bring up the materials that. Then off Jackie went, and she can probably tell that story.
Now you had been a writer before. I read about you in the paper. You actually have a degree in French.
Well, that's
correct?
right. But I was really a freelance copy editor for many years, and then I was asked to co-author an economic geography text of all things. But it was because I was able to take material written for graduate students and rewrite it for introductory students in geography. And so that was my first, well, it really wasn't the first time I wrote. Before I got involved in copy editing, I actually wrote some pieces for Childcraft Encyclopedia in Chicago, which was creative writing, really, because it was written for children, and it was we used World Book Encyclopedia, which was the parent publication. So that's how I really got started in writing.
It sounds like you have the skill to be able to write about a diverse amount of subjects, but by pulling together all the different sources
exactly.
and condensing and
Yeah.
summarizing.
Exactly.
So tell us, how did you get started once you got hired or was chosen as the author?
We did a timeline.
Yeah.
We did a timeline, and we did a, you know, what's reasonable here. The timeline actually would have brought us right up to the end of the millennium.
And it started right where
1950.
right
Yeah.
where Bert ended off right
Right.
around the exact time or shortly thereafter?
About that time. However, not in the 50s is when the town really changed from being sort of a self-sufficient community to a commuter community where most people began to work outside of the town. And I found very little material in Cohasset that related to that whole time period, so I had to interview many people to get information. And that turned out to be probably a very good idea because I was able to get quotes from people and just learn a great deal about the town that way through
It's almost like
real
a
people.
verbal, you got a verbal history.
That's right, exactly. And then I also did research and went and found old newspapers, the Cohasset Cottager, which covered the early times, which is very interesting. And it was doing that research that I found articles on the older, pre-1950 history of Cohasset that I just, I would make photocopies of them because I thought, oh, this is interesting, I might want to read it sometime. And then it occurred to me that, I just happened to find these things as I was looking up more current material. And no one knows that these things exist. So I thought, this is probably an important thing to do. So I made a more concerted effort to gather articles about Cohasset's older history. And after I wrote the narrative history, I through the Committee on Town History, I published these 2 anthologies. And a lot of the articles are written by David Wadsworth. And David was a prolific writer, but his materials were sort of stored in files and no one would necessarily know about them. They were published from time to time in the Historical Society's newsletter, but they weren't collected or organized. So I thought, they should be published. So I put them together. The first book, The Treasury, is more of a chronological history of the town from the very early times. Saber's Salt is more, it's roughly chronological, but those were articles that didn't exactly fit into the Treasury, but they were very interesting. They have a lot of personality, and for that one I featured more of the authors. So anyway, we have the 2 anthologies, and then after that it occurred to me that Cohasset doesn't have a guidebook, and that's really too bad because it's an interesting town, but even myself, who had done a little bit of research, I couldn't always remember, what this building, when it was built, or what was important about it. So I identified all the, what I thought were the historically important sites in Cohasset, and just wrote bulleted things because I didn't think people would want to spend a lot, at least judging from myself, I don't like to walk around and read a great deal about something. I find that's hard to assimilate. So I just have bulleted points of the main facts about the various sites in Cohasset. And I organized it into 10 tours of the town, so different sections of the town.
And you have led those tours in the past.
Well, not too many. I've led a couple of tours in Central Cemetery.
I was at one.
Yeah, but the others are really for people to do on their own. I mean, that's why I wrote the book, so they could do it on their own.
And you said there's 10 different tours. I know of one that I don't know if I read about
it's just the different sections of the town. Downtown Cohasset, the harbor, Wheelwright Park, and that sort of thing. Just different areas of the town where you might want to spend a little time and know something about what you're looking at.
Do you find that most people in town know about all the history, all this great resource, in the sense that You know,
Well, I don't think so. I think many people today really look upon it as a beautiful town with a wonderful beach and, you know, nice little shops and little restaurants and everything. But I'm not so sure how much they appreciate the history of the town. That's why, you know, I feel that this is the Exploring Historic Cohasset's an important book, because I feel people ought to know something, and I should think they'd want to be able to answer their visitors' questions about the town too. So,
do you feel that, I know that, you know, we've got the 2 historical buildings downtown that the Historical Society owns, and the Bates Museum, the Maritime Museum, was moved in from the harbor, and then the Wilson House, I believe, was always in
It
that
was there,
spot.
right.
But do you think most people figure that that's about it, and the rest of our history kind of either changed or got bulldozed?
No, I think see there's churches around the common. Certainly,
Beautiful.
First Parish is iconic for Cohasset. They see that, and I suppose they would look downtown and see that these stores used to be homes, and they might wonder, well, you know, what is this all about? So I think that many people have an inkling that this is certainly a colonial town with with a rich history, but I don't know how much they know about it. And I should think they'd want to know something about
would
where
think
they
so, too.
live.
We've always said that the reason they're all designed to look like a set, they're all basically the same size, and certainly the 3 narratives. Is you don't have to read them, but they sure look good on a shelf.
Oh, they should.
They're very good looking. They are.
If I may, I might add, one of the things that made this work so well, and of course I'm remembering our committee members that I'm sorry I've left their names off. We had Hal Coughlin, who had served the town very well during the town's bicentennial, which was 1970.
1970.
Yes, and he had done a wonderful paperback. He had designed. So he was just a natural. And his wife is a descendant of the Mayflower, Ellie. Hal, unfortunately, is not with us anymore, but he did a great job. Really got into it, and this brought Ernie Grassi out with his postcard collection, and said, "Well, how can we use postcards?" And we, in fact, were able to publish or republish the first 2 narratives. That was not in our charge. Our charge was to do a history book, a 3rd narrative. And what, in fact, has happened here is we've now got 7. We'll be talking about our 7th in a moment. But we've also did a curriculum for the high school, or for the school system. We did a large map, an overlay map, to give people an idea how the town looked and how it looks today, which was used by the town. How did this all happen? Starting with that small subsidy of $5,000 to get the committee off the ground, and then having a liaison from the Board of Selectmen, Diane Sullivan. And we sort of said, who needs a liaison? We do things our own way here. It turned out that Diane came to our meetings, got very involved in the meetings, and gave us some great little hints and secrets on how to deal with the Board of Selectmen at the time.
So it's useful.
What we actually got was we got a complete backing, financial backing of the town. And that again sets us aside from a more private initiative to do a book. We got the town backing, and we actually got $60,000.
Wow.
And when you look at the time spent in the years of research, the work that Hal put into this, I mean, these were actual chargeable hours for the amount of hours that had to go into it, along with all the volunteer and the cut rates and so forth. But with that we were getting it in different periods, so we didn't start with 60, but we actually went out and raised money. So we had Hubert Vanderloo also not with us anymore. And Hubert, who is a first generation Dutchman, was just totally enamored in the town. Just that this is a beautiful town, and he got so enthusiastic that his wife ran a travel agency, I believe, and they bought a bunch of books and gave them to people as they went on trips. But he went out and raised $10,000.
Amazing.
And so we had this wonderful subsidy to start, which gave us the ability to go much further with our history. We had the Corporation of the Mariner. I remember Lou Eaton would do pieces for the Mariner, just historical pieces. And we kept sort of driving the people's interest to the book. The book was not even, it hadn't even gone to the printer yet. And we were going to the fairs, the big December fair that used to be the village fair. We'd set up a table, and then we would do discounts and pre-publications. And another member of our committee, Julia Gleason, said, I don't know what I can really do on this committee, but I know one thing I can do really well. I can deliver books. And we had a big file folder of all of our pre-sales. And when that book was finally delivered, which was in 2011, right after
The first narrative?
yours.
2002.
2002, yeah, 2011, sorry. Julia was out running around hand delivering books. In some cases we had multiple orders. So it went very, very well with tremendous support from the town.
But you just to clarify some things, so you did get support from the town, you raised some money from residents and corporations, but the sale of the books go back to the town?
The sale goes into an account that we formed to be able to obviously launch other publications, and it feeds itself. We never have to go back to the town, and we promised that when we went to the board finally with Homage to the Book in hand. And the Board of Selectmen said, you know, we've already gotten basically our subsidy. We are now receiving advanced sales, which we discounted for that reason. And then it was just a nice rolling fund, which has been able to obviously do the reprints and kick off the 2 anthologies, to do the guidebook, to do the curriculum, which was done by a subset. And Nancy Garrison, I know you're out there and you're saying, when are you going to mention my name? Nancy took that on actually as a solo project within our own group. And she's the one that created the curriculum. In fact, we had 17 by 11.
I remember. I think I was on the school committee when
Right,
you presented that to the town. or the
And that
schools.
was all due to Nancy. It was a wonderful, wonderful little piece of it all. So, you know, I hope the buttons aren't popping off this shirt to say that this little town of 7,800 people, 2,500, 2,600 households, has more history dripping from it than any colonial town in the United States, insofar as it's all been done as a set, all done with, let's make this look like it's all of the town. The Minot Light logo, because of Hal, putting that on the spine. And
a real dedication from the town residents, as you said. So many people just, it's amazing to me. I didn't grow up in Cohasset, but the love that people feel for this town, and I always laugh, it's like you can't ever leave Cohasset because why would you want to? People are so dedicated, and the amount of time they give to volunteer efforts and the projects they take on behalf of the town, it's amazing. It really is. It's very admirable.
I'd also like to say, I really should have mentioned the fact that I think the Historical Society does a wonderful job in keeping history alive. When you ask me whether I think people are aware of the town, I think they do a great deal in raising the public's awareness of the wonderful periods in Cohasset's history, like they have the Cohasset on the Rocks, the maritime history, and
they've got so much.
So I think the town does a good job in keeping history alive and keeping the people interested and hopefully wanting to learn more.
All right, well, so let's talk about the new book. So the new book is called The
Origins of Cohasset.
The Land and Its People.
The Land and Its People. And the reason I wanted to do that was, first of all, I do a lot of walking around the town, and of course when you walk around Cohasset you see all this beautiful ledge. And I would wonder, you know, where did all this come, how did it form? And so I've always been interested in the geology of Cohasset, and of course Bigelow was also interested. He published in 1898. And he was a very learned man, and if you read about it, you'll read about all the little crystals. I mean, he's very detailed. But I wanted sort of the big picture. And he, writing in 1898, didn't know about plate tectonics, which has sort of revolutionized people's understanding of the formation of the Earth. So I was interested in that. And then also I was thinking of the first peoples who lived here, and we know about the Cohasset Indians. And I wondered, well, who were they really? Where did they come from? What was their life like? So I just had those two interests for many, many years. And it just occurred to me after finishing exploring historic Cohasset that I probably had one more book to write. And that was about the formation of the land and the first peoples who lived here.
All right, well, let's divide it into the two groups. So tell us about the land. What's the most significant thing? Where did we come from? Why is there so much ledge? Is Black Rock a leftover volcano, which I've always heard, down at the beach?
Well, the bedrock of Cohasset was formed 600 million years ago. It's amazing, really. Near the South Pole. It was part of a volcanic island chain. I mean, it's just an incredible story.
Is this when we were all like Pangea, when everything was
this
all...
was even before that. It was before that. I don't want to get too much into the detail. You'll have to read the book.
It's going to leave us hanging in suspense.
But there were two supercontinents at one time. There was Gondwana, which was near the South Pole, and Laurentia, which was further north. We were the southernmost part of that. We were a volcanic island chain that developed off this coast of an old supercontinent. And then because of the movements of the plates of the Earth, eventually the mass of land that the bedrock that we are on migrated north, and it joined other continents, and the two big supercontinents merged and formed that Pangea, that one supercontinent, and then they split apart. It's a very interesting, to me it's a very interesting story, and I hope to convey that. It's a little technical, but I did get some help from a geophysicist at Old Dominion University in Virginia, who was a friend of a friend in Cohasset. So I think that people will be able to follow it, plus I got some good illustrations which will be helpful. But I think the story itself is fascinating, and then of course you come to the Ice Age, which brings us closer to the present. The interesting thing about that is that this area was under ice for 10,000 years. When you think about that, I mean, just the scale of the time scale, the space scale it's huge, but
a blink of an eye in geological time.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. And then after the ice melts away, people start coming across from Siberia, across the Bering Bridge, because so much ice was water was locked up in the ice that a land bridge was formed. And so you begin to get the first humans in North America. They eventually, some migrate to the East Coast, And that's where the story of the people begins.
The people of, okay, so the people or the people of Cohasset specifically?
Well, the people, because the very first humans in North America were the Paleo Indians. They were primitive. They hunted mammoths and mastodons and so forth. And I don't know that they lived in Cohasset. They really wandered. But I believe they traversed this land. And they may have disappeared at one point and been replaced by other people. So I'm not sure that there's just one stock of people that stayed here for generations and generations. It might be waves of migration from the West. But at any rate, there have been people living in the Cohasset area, probably from 8,000 years ago on, off and on, let's say.
Now, is there any evidence that's been left over from those folks as far as really prehistoric time?
Now, the Historical Society does have some artifacts. The oldest one does date back to about 8,000 years ago, and that's a spearhead. And then it has many spearheads, later on arrowheads, fishing sinkers. They have many more artifacts than I imagined.
Because I think a lot of people think, myself included, again, starting with what we think was the real history of the United States only began in like 1620. When the Pilgrims showed up, and at that time, it really, from my understanding, weren't too many Indians left in Cohasset. That smallpox had really eradicated a lot of tribes, and I know the Pilgrims dealt with a lot of the councils of Indians that were down more in Rhode Island. So had there been tribes here, and then when the Pilgrims got here, not so much? What's the truth of that?
Okay, the first European to set foot on Cohasset's shore was John Smith in 1614. So he did find the Quonahasset Indians. We were first placed on the map by John Smith. And there was an Indian village here at the time. After about a year or so later, a tribe from the north, from Nova Scotia, the Tarratines, came down and they fought the Massachusetts Indians and killed a great many of them. And it's also thought that an epidemic of what's now believed to be is called leptospirosis might have been brought in these French ships, because the Tarratine Indians from Nova Scotia traded with the French. They traded furs for other goods. And it's believed that the Tarratines came down in French ships, which they loaded with their canoes, and they were also given guns to hunt more efficiently by the French. It's thought that maybe rats from these ships carried the disease, were able to get on shore, got into the food stores of the Indians and the water supplies, the streams and so forth. And that's how the disease spread. It wasn't like wildfire, it took time. But so it was a combination of fighting and disease that wiped out many of the Indian villages in this area.
So when folks think of Cohasset really being formed, or the area, it was part of Hingham, which was established in 1635. So at that time, were there any Indians around, or no?
There were pockets. Just a few of them, and they helped the first Hingham settlers. They taught them how to plant corn, beans, and squash, and so forth. So, but there weren't a great many of them, and they were hired by the Hingham settlers as day laborers and domestic servants and so forth. But what happened afterwards, it's really a very tragic story for the Indians. King Philip's War broke out in 1676. And that it really finished the Indians in this area. Further south on the Cape and the islands, though, the Indians there were loyal to the English, and they survived, and they actually were able to keep many of their traditions too. So the Indians did what's left of the Wampanoag Indians would be in Mashpee and Akina, and some of those towns. And
so again, not to give away the ending of your story, but does it just cover that time period, or do you go on to talk about the native people as they were replaced by settlers? Or?
Yeah, I followed the story of the Indians from the Paleo Indians to the remnants that were left, and then I just really end at the end of King Philip's War and a little bit afterwards, but in Cohasset it was over by that time.
So what did you find were some of the more fascinating things that you discovered?
Well, first of all, I thought it was very interesting to learn that the bedrock began so long ago, and that there were Indians in this area as long as 8,000 years ago. I didn't really think about that too much, but that they've been around, that Indians were here for a long time, and they had a life. They farmed the area, they fished, they hunted here. They had gatherings, they celebrated the harvests. So they had a good life in their terms.
But so typical of what happened to all Indians so much on the East Coast happened to the same in Cohasset.
Yeah.
So difficult, just trying to integrate, and after the war it was move on. Or
well, and many of them were sold as the men, the warriors were captives, were sold as slaves and shipped off to the Caribbean. The women and children were in servitude. Sometimes some were free. They weren't all enslaved, but they basically it decimated the Indians, and it ended there.
And they didn't, I shouldn't say, I know, but they didn't really provide much of a written history.
No, which is really too bad. And it's too bad for them, because it's our account of their lives. I suppose there's an oral history, but that's not as reliable, and certainly we don't have it from the people who lived here.
Right. So when you got your research, where were you getting all this information, though, about all this?
Well, there's a tremendous, the early explorers wrote. So you do have a lot of information from people who actually interacted with the Indians here, and some of them almost lived with them. So you have a pretty good picture of what their lives were like, but it was written from the perspective of an Englishman.
Right. Jim, were you in the committee surprised at some of the things that she uncovered? Did she change your...
Heck no, we just take it for granted now. We know that she's going to come up with these little gems. I was thinking a little bit about how some of this is displayed in the book. Kimberly Alemian joined our committee actually to do the guidebook, and the guidebook is in full color, as is the origins. So you can see good pictures, and they're not easily found. Jackie did a marvelous job in digging them up in full color. So it's a wonderful little book. It's absolutely the book that will round out your set.
The volume. Any thoughts, though, of the school pulling it into the curriculum? I know in following, the work of Nancy Garrison and that initiative, I mean, to really learn about Native Cohasset, all its background history, using your material?
I think it would be useful at the high school level, this Origins book. To me, I think it would open up a classroom to some interesting discussion, because I don't give a lot of my opinions or my conclusions about things because, you know, it can be open to different interpretations, and I would think it'd be interesting for I don't know, juniors and seniors to think about, you know, why did the Indians not survive as a people, as a culture here, and just to talk about it. I think that would make for some great classroom discussion, in my opinion. For the younger children, I know that the third graders do study the town to some extent, and I would think exploring historic Cohasset. I think they're asked to find Cohasset on a map and you know, identify some of the important landmarks that we have and a little something about them. So maybe for the teachers more than for the children, the guidebook would be a useful tool.
Do you think that a lot of the third graders are enamored with the story, which is pretty, you know, I guess significant in the sense that he is a literary figure, you know, Captain Smith, you know, the whole Pocahontas. Here he was in Cohasset. You know, do they think that Pocahontas was here in Cohasset? But you know, it's pretty significant that he came by and it has a history here.
I don't know if a third grader would relate to that.
I guess maybe my kids in the third grade, that movie at Disney was really, you know, had hit the screen. So of course they thought that was the greatest thing ever, that, you know, that happened here in Cohasset and so forth. So it just, I guess, just kind of made their history a little more cinematic than actual fact.
It's possible. Of course, it's been a long time since my children were that little, so perhaps.
You know, it's a good compliment, though, our history to really some recently rediscovered history. Isn't it Nathaniel Philbrick that did the book Plymouth?
Mayflower.
The Mayflower.
Right.
And my wife and I are from Plymouth, so we both grew up there, and it was, we were growing up at the time that Plymouth Plantation was just an idea. It wasn't even, it hadn't happened yet, just the Pilgrim Society on Court Street. And Plymouth Plantation has really, from an archaeological standpoint, completely turned over the sort of the classic perceptions of how the Pilgrims lived.
Right.
They've done it by archaeological digs, finding the kinds of pipes they smoked and from, and the pieces of cutlery and so forth. And they brought the Indian history in, and then from a national standpoint, along comes Philbrick, and gives you a real sense of what an incredible colony that was. And the point is, maybe our history doesn't compare, but it complements that, and at some point, we all get more interested in this. And I'm not sure it's with age. It's just as all that good information is out there. King Philip's War, I mean, it wasn't 15 years ago that if you went up to somebody and said, you know all about, by the way, do you know the one war in this country that killed more Americans than the Civil War? It was King Philip's War by percentage. Small population, very short war, lasted
14 months.
year.
Right. Amazing.
And it was, and of course, all men were armed. I mean, that when you 50 years after the Pilgrims landed and the peace treaties were made, it was I think it was Massasoit's son, King Philip.
Right.
He was the renegade, and great injustices had been done to the Indians. Pacts had been broken, and if he had not if he had unified the Indians, the colonists could very well have been driven out.
Right.
Or driven inland, or driven away.
Or shared the country somehow.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that point with Philbrick, just like the work of your own, don't you find that the new research, the new tools available to you, has really kind of rewritten history, enlightened it. I mean, so many of us were taught, oh, the Pilgrims, you know, they came over. There was the Indians welcomed them with, you know, turkeys and feasts, and everything worked great. And here's the rock, and then these books you find out, well, that wasn't necessarily the case, and it really gives them a whole new perspective of what really happened. It has changed the mood or the understanding of.
And I think people are much more flexible today too when history needs to be rewritten. The original Plymouth Plantation, if you went to the little thatched roof house that used to be downtown Plymouth near where the Mayflower is now docked, Mayflower 2 replica, you'd go in there and there was a wonderful sort of chest in this little house. You know, there'd be the pots and so forth, the kettles and the big fireplace. Well, the Pilgrims didn't have any room on the Mayflower to bring a chest over. And it happened that in Plymouth Plantation they were, in fact, building the recreation of the homes. That was part of the whole process. You go by, you see the adzing and the thatching and so forth. And finally somebody came up to one of the homes, which was the Dr. Samuel Fuller house, and said to a gentleman by the name of Dr. Hamilton, who was my dad, you know, Hammy, you got it all wrong. They didn't have any of this stuff. We're going to get rid of it. And my dad said, great, let's go find out really what it was. And that sent him to Leiden, Holland, to do some research, actually, to figure out what kind of medical equipment they might have had. And anyway, just the refreshing of history.
Right.
And starting to take it from a new focus, and everybody's saying, you're right, we got to make it right, and now we can find out things better because our technology is better.
Well, and I would assume it gives a better attachment to the town, because now through the work of I feel more connected.
Well, and I think it really does add another dimension to to one's appreciation of the town. As I say, I like to walk, and for a while, as I was doing the research on the Indians, I would just look at a place and I thought, oh, that would be a great place for a little summer encampment. And you see the town, and you have a better picture of the resources that it offered people who lived off the land and off the sea.
Well, it's nice to have that, that connection to the Native American, because it is such a big piece of the American experience. And I think I can only speak for myself, I kind of felt like, well, there wasn't really too much Native American history going on in Cohasset, or nobody knows, or it got obliterated. So it's nice to be able to reach down and touch it again and feel it.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
It's amazing work. Well, so tell us, though, overall, though, in all your history, because I'm hearing Mark DiGiacomo in my head. Of course, this is a Mark DiGiacomo question he'd have to say to you, as we get close to wrapping up. What's the most scandalous thing in Cohasset history that you uncovered in all the work that you did?
How recent history
Well,
are you talking? How?
Starting before last night's town meeting.
Oh gosh.
Oh,
It's again so rich. You've got so much stuff, but
well, scandalous. I don't think.
Not too much.
This is New England. I don't think of it. I can't think of anything terribly scandalous that happened. Unfortunately, it's a nice little town. And
I would say pranks in this town. Certainly, the town that we moved into, which was in the late '60s. I was reminded last night, we've been here for 43 years, and we were the new kids on the block when we came in.
And you've seen a lot of change?
Well, we've seen a lot of change, a tremendous amount of change, and things have to be much more regimented today than they were at a time when the police chief could have his son on the force.
Oh, that's
today
true.
that is such a conflict.
That was
I mean, there's no objectivity whatsoever. Before we do wrap up, though, I do want to say that our book will be ready. Origins book will be ready. We will have it hopefully in our bookstores the end of this week. Our bookstore is Buttonwood. They've been a wonderful partner in getting books out. We don't sell books directly. We, in fact, sell the books to basically our retailers. So The books go to Buttonwood, the books go to the Cohasset Historical Society, and you can get them at Town Hall.
And copies of the others, I originally
All of
imagined
them,
too?
all of them are available.
So, Jackie, are you really finished? I mean, it seems like
Well,
every time
never
you
say
write
never. But I don't have any plans for another book.
Okay.
And I thought, now that this is more or less over, I think I'll volunteer at the Historical Society and
Got so much to offer. I'm
well,
surprised they would let you do anything else.
Well, and who knows? Maybe I'll do a little writing for them
maybe
at some point.
cemetery story.
The
I
cemetery.
still think about your
Yeah,
cemetery
they-
tour,
they-
and
yeah,
all the
they
history that's
expressed an
there.
interest in that. And Central Cemetery is wonderful.
Yeah.
That is a treasure.
It's
you know.
amazing.
Yeah.
I think for some folks, so it's tough, to read the old tombstones.
Right.
So I would hate to see some of that history be lost because of the wear
right.
and tear. But
Right.
so, but in closing, is your committee now done, or will the
I think we'll pretty much wrap things up as a committee. We do want to be able to have a good pipeline that is refreshed with books. Our books are in the town hall in their own store closet. They're all shrunk wrap like a nice head of
come in this
lettuce.
beautiful case, too? and then
They come
3
in
volumes?
cases, and the cases, I'm glad you brought that up, Pat. Those slip cases, which really make the 3 volumes handsome, come at no extra charge should you buy all 3 books.
Well, I really don't think that any home in Cohasset should be without these books. And,
That's music to our ears.
I hope people think about them as the perfect Christmas gift as we're going in. We're taping tonight on the 11th, but obviously we've got 13 more days to shopping, so head on down and pick up all of them. These I have not read. These I've gotten, I have to say, this one was a little difficult. These
Yeah.
are very easy to read and fascinating.
You can go through and read different parts of Volume 1.
Excellent.
Yes.
Well, thank you both for the work that you've done on
Well,
behalf
thank you
of the
for
town.
asking us,
Working on the committee all those years and doing all the research to bring all this to light and into print. It's really appreciated. I think it's great. All right, folks. So there you have it. So head on out and pick up one of these many books or all of these books for your library about Cohasset, and maybe use them as possible gifts for the upcoming Christmas. And on behalf of our town, I'd like to thank our crew and our guests for joining us tonight. Tune in for a show coming up soon, I imagine, right after the new year. But for tonight, I'm Pat Martin. Good night.